Hello, everyone, and welcome to our newest podcast series for QT2 Systems, 10 Tips to Crush Your Next Triathlon. In this series, we are going to welcome our coaches, and they are going to talk about all the things that go into racing your best on the day that counts for you. And it all starts at the beginning, which is picking your race. And so today we are joined by longtime QT2 Systems coach Jackie Miller, who over the years has helped hundreds of athletes pick the best races for them. So I'm really happy to welcome Coach Jackie Miller today. Welcome.
Thanks, ma'am.
All right. So we were, going through this, and every year it comes up, with our athletes. How do you pick the race? And I think that sometimes not enough thought goes into this. So I kind of want to talk about the different things, I want you to talk about the different things that go into picking the right race. And we sort of, when we were talking before, put them into a few buckets, and we'll go through each of these, but like starting with the time of year of the race.
Yep.
Then whether the course suits you or not, because all courses are different. The location here, like close to home, travel race, destination race, the size of the race, the branding of the race, are those factors that you want to consider. And then just other, support things. Do you have friends that you want to train a race with? Is it a team event for you? So I'm going to we'll go back, loop back to the first one of those things, which is time of year. And maybe you can just start by talking about why time of year is something that people should consider.
We all have different schedules and different responsibilities in our life. So you really have to look at what month of the year the race is and then go backwards to when you have to start training and, determine if the thick of the training, which is, the last, the month or so before the big day, is going to fall in a time where your kids are busy in school, they're graduating, or they have their end of the year like recitals or performances, and make sure you're swaying away from things like that. Or if it's a busy sports season for your child and you're going to be traveling to soccer games or golf tournaments or baseball tournaments, shy away from that time of the year. Again, with work, some of us have jobs that are busier at certain times of the year than others. So if you're an accountant, you're not going to choose a race where the thick of your training is during tax season. So definitely look at your calendar with your family and your job. And those are probably the top two in regards to the time of the year. Then you also want to look at seasons, and if you race better in the heat or if you race better in cooler weather, you would want to also look at that, the time of the year when the race is being held, when you're going to be doing the thick of your training. If you don't mind training, like if you're training for, say, Ironman Florida, which is in November, the hottest time of the year is when you're going to be doing the highest volume of training. Are you okay with that? Or would you rather pick, a race where you're to be training through the winter and racing in the spring, so your training is coming in a cooler time of the year? So those are my top ideas when it comes to the time of the year. And if you
Yeah.
have any to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, going with that, like in a lot of the athletes I train live in the Northeast, and when they start coming up with races that are in May and June, I actually get a little nervous for them because they can get a lot of their training done indoors, but especially if they're newer and they don't have a lot of open water swim experience to go in and do a race in May. I'm like, you don't want your first, open water swim experience to be on race day,
Right.
if you haven't done a lot of races.
And same thing for the bike. A lot of, especially like Ironman Texas, people from the Northeast, they're coming right off their trainers and straight into riding 112 miles on the road. So, maybe if you feel like your bike handling skills are one of your limiters, you don't want to go straight from riding your trainer for 4 months onto the road and racing without getting outside on your bike.
Yeah, and that also goes that if you're riding all that time on your trainer, it's probably because you live in cold weather, and then you're going to a race that's in warm weather because you wouldn't have an Ironman in cold weather, right, in April. And
Right.
so there becomes that heat acclimation becomes a factor
Yes.
in that as well. So
Very
yeah,
true.
time
Yeah.
of year. I was saying to to my son the other day, I'm really thinking about doing this race, but it's going to be in the middle of your cross country season. And so you would have to miss some days. And I'm talking through, I was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that race. Like it was automatically off the table because of when it was going to fall relative to things that were important to, someone other than myself. So yeah.
Yep, yep. And I chose the spring race that's very hot, and I'm thinking like, oh, I'm gonna have such an advantage because I live in Florida and it's hot, and I'm gonna be trained to the heat, and we've had like 3 weeks in the 40s. I'm like, okay, that theory's out the window.
Yeah, it'll come back too.
Yeah,
Don't worry,
yeah,
it's
true,
still
true.
warmer than here. So
Not gonna complain right now.
yeah,
Yeah,
it is. Time of year is a really critical factor. And I think that you brought up the important point that it's not just when the race is, but when you're doing like your big chunk of training that last, 2 to 6 weeks out, depending on the schedule that you're on, that it's,
yep,
if that falls when your kid is graduating from high school or something, you have to try to stay away from, that piece of
for
it.
sure, for sure.
So the next one though, and this came up just a little bit in the first question, is finding a course that suits you because some are quicker than others and some people excel in different situations. So starting with the swim, like what kind of swims are out there in races?
Yeah, so that is a big one, the swim. And if there's lake or pond swims, which are usually pretty calm. They can have some chop. There's the river swims, which for weaker swimmers is definitely an advantage because you have that current to push you. And then there's um, ocean or gulf swims, which are very unpredictable because they could be flat, they could be um, undertows, there could be big waves, small waves, there's sea life, there's more to deal with the saltwater swims. So um, if you're a strong swimmer, it doesn't really matter. Well, like a downstream river swim for someone who's a very good swimmer isn't going to work to their advantage, but it isn't going to harm them. But somebody who's a weak swimmer, doesn't like to swim, doesn't want to do a lot of swim training, for sure a downstream river swim would work to their advantage. Um, or a course like Lake Placid, not to keep using Ironman, but there's the line that you can sight off of. The lake is usually pretty calm, so that would be, an easier swim. So those are some things you have to figure out. The time of the year, like, do you like cold water? So if you like, if cold water really knocks your wind out and have a fear or panic of cold water, you might not want to pick a swim where the water temperature is going to be cold.
Yeah, and that
And then also wetsuit versus non-wetsuit.
Yeah. And those are things, I mean, thankfully now with races, there's a lot of information out there about what you can
Hmm.
expect for temperature because there's a lot of, races I've helped my athletes go through where like, okay, that bike suits you, that run suits you, but the swim is only going to be around 60. Are you okay with that? And that's a factor. And some people are like, yeah, fine. I mean, they swim well in cold weather and other people get really cold when the temperature is like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's important. And then the wetsuit versus not wetsuit. Again, I mean, that's
Hmm.
a really important concern. Most races, I would say 90% of races at least out there are wetsuit legal, but not always. So
Correct. Correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So going to the bike, what kind of variations do we see? Like what factors would you can look to in the bike course?
So I think a lot of that comes into play. I mean, we're very fortunate these days though with Zwift and the new Training Peaks Virtual and Full Gas and all the training platforms where you can somewhat simulate hills on your trainer. But if you're coming from Florida or Texas, someplace that's pretty flat, and if you're trying to choose a race for performance versus we discussed earlier, like a racecation versus like a PR course, if you're just looking for a racecation, it's not going to matter so much. But if you're looking to have a good performance and you want to do well, or you're gunning for like a world championship slot, then you definitely want to choose a course that works to your strengths versus your limiters. So if you're someone coming from Florida and you're thinking about racing a very hilly race, you're going to have to do a lot of extra like thinking through of like trainer, low cadence, traveling places for training to practice in the hills. And you're just not going to be suited the best for you because you're just not going to be able to train as somebody that lives in a hillier area would be able to. And then it goes the same thing, vice versa. If you're like someone that lives in upstate New York, like yourself, and it's all hills, and you're just used to riding outside in hills all the time, and then you come to a very flat course where you're going to be aero for 56, 112 miles. You're using different muscles, you're down on your bars for long periods of time. So, and you're just pedaling constantly. It's not up and then down, up and then down. It's just steady pedaling. So, you have to take that into consideration too. If you live in a hilly area, you're going to want to sit on your trainer, ride flat, be in your aero bars on your trainer, and just get used to that positioning.
Yeah, very different for sure. And then, some other things that I raced at the Nice, the World Championships this year, and I went into it knowing it was hilly. But the things that I didn't think about and give enough time were the road conditions. Some races have better road, it's like if it's smooth asphalt, it's a lot nicer than if it's even chip seal or if you've got potholes, and some races are not
Very,
clean, and that's something to look at. And then also how technical the race is. It's like we think about hills, we think about going up and not so much going down. Like if you are not comfortable flying down a hill at 40 miles
right,
an hour, there's some, like the Happy Valley 70.3 has a pretty tough downhill on it, and you
yeah,
like thinking about that, that piece of it, because if you're not comfortable opening up the speed, then maybe the hills are
right,
another reason that may not be the best
yeah.
choice, for
And then,
you.
like you said, technical. Think St. Anthony's when there's like 27 turns in a 26-mile course, right? And there's hairpin turns and sharp turns, and that's something you need to practice because you're turning in with a group of other cyclists, and like holding your line, like don't go out swing wide when you're inside, and then there's other cyclists you're going to knock down. So technicality is a big one as well,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And then, okay, so on the bike, now
Mhm.
in my mind, like this is already, I can tell you, I look for lake swims, hilly bike courses. Now, like those are the races I perform best at. So I like look at them, and not 60-degree temperature in the water. So I'll add that, add that to the mix. And I don't really like jellyfish so much either. So there's races I stay away from because of that.
Yeah,
So, and then we get to the run, which by the time you get to the run, I think most people need some motivation around. So what are the factors that go into looking that you want to look to in the run course?
sure. Again, time of the year or more climate. So the heat factor, the humidity factor versus, drier air, um, and the terrain. Again, same thing as with the site, like with the bike. Same thing if you're coming from a flatter state and you're going to race a hillier area, you're going to have to figure out, be creative with training methodologies such as, inclines on the treadmill, running parking garages, finding overpasses to try to get some of those muscles activated that you would use going up and down hills. Because again, like totally different muscle usage versus just running straight and flat all the time. And again, some people race fine in the heat, and some people just wilt and start walking the whole time. So you have to determine whether your body is a body that can handle running in hot, humid, or hot and dry conditions. And if not, you're going to have to, we talked about earlier about heat acclimation, you're going to have to figure out creative ways to heat acclimate, creative ways to keep yourself cool in the course, like carrying bags of ice or keeping yourself wet with water from the aid station, sponges, cooling towels, things like that. And vice versa. If you're somebody coming from Florida, well, I mean, I don't know. I think everyone likes running in cooler weather, so I'm not even going to go backwards on that one. But basically, coming from a cooler area to a hot run area is going to be challenging. And then again, flat versus hills.
And then how about like loop courses that go through like, the city? Like I always think it's fun when like Ironman or whatever race that you're in is in a village or a college scene or
Yeah,
whatever, and you
for
actually
sure.
get to race through, and
Yes.
you have people that come and, cheer you on. I
Yeah.
think it's pretty important on the run for that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, loops versus spectator friendly courses. If you think some of your favorite, because it comes down to run is even if you are a natural runner, you came to the sport for running, you love running, the run is no matter what, it's going to be the most challenging of the three, even if the run is your gift because it's at the end of the race. But you have to think like, do you like crowds? Because some of the run courses are super fun where you're running through town and people are cheering, where other ones are very desolate and you're running and there's a little spectators when you're coming out of transition or you're near the finish line, but then you're out in the middle of nowhere with just all the other athletes and it's very quiet and can get very desolate and lonely out there. So that's another thing. Like if you like to get in your own head and you don't need people cheering you on, an out and back, a big, huge out and back course or a 2-loop course would suit you fine. And then if you like a lot of people on the side ringing cowbells and holding signs and yelling for you, then the more like 2 to 3 loop courses are definitely going to be thicker spectators than the out and backs.
Yeah, and those are fun if you've got people that are traveling with you, because often the run
Yes.
is the only time they get to see you. So
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I'll have to say, like in Nice, it was an out and back 4 times. So it was a really good spectator course, but I wasn't feeling very well on the run. And so all the people yelling at me, I was like, stop.
Oh,
I can't, like you're too loud. But it was fun. It made the run like really interesting because there were just so many people out there and that, but
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So next one, away from courses, location. What are sometimes it's really easy to pick that race that's close to home, and sometimes it's really fun to pick a race that's far away. So what are the kinds of things that you might want to consider in deciding the location of a race?
Right. So location, a lot of that is going to come down to your budget because the farther away it is, the more expense that's going to be involved because now you're going to have to get an airplane ticket. You're going to have to pay to travel with your bike. So most airlines these days charge the same as a suitcase if it's under 50 pounds. I know that JetBlue still charges $100 each way versus $35 each way. And a couple of other ones like have either a more expensive fee or you can't travel with your bike at all. So you have to check the airlines and then see what airlines travel to where the destination is. And then the fee of traveling with your bike. Do you have a bike case? Do you know how to break your own bike down? Or are you going to have to take it to the bike shop and pay the bike shop to disassemble your bike and pack it, and then pay at the destination to then have it assembled and disassembled and repacked. And then you're going to get back home and have to pay again to have it reassembled when you get back home. So all of those are big fees. And then the accommodation. So if it's, we all know that during race week, accommodating hotels and Airbnbs totally jack up the prices. And so but some areas are still cheaper than others. So maybe you're racing in a Midwest race that's not a super vacationy area. So they might not be, their accommodations may not be as expensive as somewhere like California race or a Florida race, or like that's a vacation, Hawaii, things like that. And then again, going back to the plane, like the cost of the ticket. So, uh, you know, from flying from Florida to Texas is going to be fairly reasonable price versus flying from Florida to Europe or Hawaii or someplace like that. I'm sure like and the time that the travel is going to take, like the people that went over to New Zealand for World 70.3. I mean, that was like 24 hours or more of travel. So do you have that extra time off work where you can spend an entire day or more on both ends traveling to another country? So
And the jet lag that goes along with the travel, or
yes,
just the exhaustion
yes,
that comes with flying. But that said, like sometimes people sign up for races because they're in really cool destinations. So there are like pros to doing a travel
right,
race.
right. Yep.
Yeah. And I think another, piece of that too is that if it's a local race, maybe it's not as exciting because it's local, but it gives you the advantage of maybe being able to train on the course. And I think that
Yes.
especially if it's one of your first races, that there is comfort going into a race, knowing
Oh, for
what
sure.
the weather's going to be like and knowing what the bike course,
Yes.
in
Yes.
advance. So,
Yes. And it's
but
a lot easier to throw all your stuff in the car, even if it's a 9 or 10 hour car ride versus a flight. Yeah, that's not, super fun to sit in your car for 9 or 10 hours. However, it's just easier to throw all your gear in your car and not think like, how do I pack this? How do I condense this down into a bag that's suitable to get on the airplane? And It just is logistically a lot easier in the car. And same with the closer you are to your where you live, the more likely the terrain and the weather will be what you're used to.
Yeah. And I think that that is a pretty big factor, like just knowing what the hills are like, and the
Hmm.
temperature. And
Yep.
it's tough. I lived in Florida for a while, and then I would go to do the colder races for running, not so much for triathlon. And it was just too cold. My body couldn't adjust to
Yeah.
that, like,
Yeah.
difference. And but on the flip side, living in New York and racing Chattanooga in May doesn't work well for me because it's just
No.
too hot.
No.
Like I can handle that temperature in the summer, but in May, my body's not
Right.
ready for it.
Yes.
And I
And
tried
I
to
feel like we can try
listen
our
for you.
best to like to acclimate indoors, with like putting space heater on your trainer and don't use a fan or wear the like stupid plastic suit when you're running or sit in the sauna. And those are all just like short little moments. It's not like you're actually out running in it for hours, or biking 56 or 112 miles in 90-degree weather with 75% humidity when you're just sitting on your trainer for a couple hours with like no fan or space heater or whatever it might be. It doesn't all correlate in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, if you've got your family and they want to go to, I don't know, right? Puerto Rico's are one of our big races this year for
It
our team
is.
event, which is really interesting because I know we don't have any athletes. Well, I don't think we have any athletes that actually live in Puerto Rico,
No.
and it's in March and it's got a lot of interest this year. So sometimes getting
Yeah.
escaping is what motivates you. So
And I think as far as I know right now, only two of us, there's somebody from South Florida racing and myself from Central Florida, but everybody else is from the Northeast.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but part of that, I think picking the right race is what excites you because you can like talk yourself into all those like practical, logistical things. But if you're not excited to train because it's not somewhere you want to race, then,
Right.
it kind of defeats
Right.
all that too. So there's the emotional piece of it, and then there's the practical piece of it
Yes.
and picking.
Yep.
Both important to think about.
Yep.
So,
Like for me, it's like going back to the time of the year, I love Christmas and we put, there's always a lot of stuff going on. Haines City, Florida 70.3 is less than 2 hours from my front door, but it's always in the middle of December. And I'm like, I'm not gonna like go do a race like 2 weeks before Christmas when there's always something fun, not that a race isn't fun, but it just is weird to me to go do a race that time of the year. So, but it's a very popular race and a lot of people do it. So it's like, very
yeah.
competitive race. So
Right, but that's where you have to pick what's right for you.
for
And in fact,
you,
as we
yes,
talk about all these things, like some of them, you're like, oh, I don't really care either way. That's fine,
right.
but some stuff. So you have to think about it, everyone personally. There's not a right or wrong answer. It's what,
Yep. Yep.
looking at it from your own viewpoint, what you want out of the race, but important to
Right.
think, the
Yep.
first race that I signed up for, I didn't know that it was an ocean swim until I showed up.
Oh no,
Whoops. I've learned a little since then, but
for sure.
yeah. Um, okay, so the next one we've hit this a little bit already, but size of the race and also branding because there's some big,
Mhm.
obviously Ironman and Challenge and there's different race series out there, and then there's like your local races and
Mhm.
stuff. So
Mhm.
why is that important? The size,
Sure.
whether it's a branded race or not.
Right. So obviously the local races are going to be a lot of fun. You're going to have a lot of your local tri community out there racing. But maybe it's not super exciting because it's not like some big thing you're traveling and a long-term goal going someplace exciting to do a race. So that's one factor to consider. But with the local races also, if something happens, it's a lot easier to either get your money back or defer, get an entry for the following year versus the bigger branded races are a lot harder to get out of, right? So that's one thing to consider. The race series, a lot of local tri clubs or running clubs have their series. So do you want to participate in all these little local races to try to get your points to win your local tri club series or your local run club series? So that's another thing to consider. So if you're trying to do series in the local area, you know, you need to look at if you're going to be missing one of those points races for a travel race, right? And then the bigger branded races, obviously the registration fee is going to be more expensive. They used to sell out, so you'd have to, you know, really get on board with early sign up. And even local races are sometimes tiered, but if you think like the larger races tier their pricing, so sometimes you don't have a long time to think about it. So as soon as the race is over that year, registration opens a few days later, which is the cheapest pricing tier. So you kind of feel obligated, like, well, if I want to save like $75, I need to sign up right now, versus, you know, in 6 months from now, when I have more time to think about it, it's going to be either sold out or the fees are going to be 75 or $100 more expensive. A larger race might be, you might find more exciting, but the competition is going to be stiffer. So, you know, your local races are smaller. So if in your mind it's about getting on the podium, it's going to be a lot easier in the smaller races or your local races to get on your podium versus the bigger Ironman or challenge races when there's stiff competition racing. You know, you don't know who's racing, you don't know, like, oh, you know, locally, you know who your competition is locally versus you don't know who's going to show up to a race with 3,000 people. And, you know, it's going to be harder if podium is your what you're looking for to make that happen. But the large races can be more exciting. There's more fans cheering for you. There's lots of things outside of race day going on. The expos are a little bigger. There's sometimes, you know, pro panel talks or workshops you can attend, things like that.
Yeah, and sometimes with that big price tag that goes with the branded races comes with a lot of swag too. So like, I
Yes,
don't know how
yes,
many
for sure.
bags I have, right? You know,
Yep.
that it comes with, and maybe like support on course, nutrition support, and that's a like a
Hmm.
factor that goes in, you know, sometimes with what you get.
For sure. And I mean, I gotta say, like, not harping on, I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons. People, you know, people go back and forth with the branded races. But there's support like none other when you pay. I mean, you're paying big dollars to race the Ironman branded events, but you never have to worry about, am I going to come to the aid station and they're going to be out of aid, or there's not going to be anybody at the aid station and self-serve, or, you know, they ran out of stuff. It's hot Coke in a can that's unopened, or, you know, it's just, you know what you're going to get at Ironman or Challenge. You know what's going to be at each aid station. It's logistically a bit easier versus not going into some race that you've never heard of and not really knowing what you're going to get.
Yeah.
But then sometimes those smaller races are just really nice too, you know? I mean, I can think of Claremont, a race up in Claremont that's a low, you know, individually, not a branded race. And you do get really good swag. I mean, there's not a lot of spectators cheering you on, but very organized, very well run with aid stations, great swag, and, you know, as long as you know, like reading race reviews or race reports from other people, what you're going to get, what to expect. Is it organized? Is it not organized? Because another thing you want to think about is the safety of the bike course, because some of the smaller races may or may not have enough police officers or people out on the course stopping traffic. And so safety sometimes becomes an issue if you don't know, like, the race director and what kind of safety precautions they're going to take. Versus, you know, with the bigger races, that's all taken care of. They've got their permits, they've got their police, they've got the intersections blocked for bikers to get through, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really important. And it's probably, I mean, one factor we didn't talk about the bike, but now you bring this up is whether the course is closed or not. Sometimes
Mhm.
courses are closed to traffic, sometimes they're not. Sometimes
Right.
they're marshaled and volunteered better than others. And that's, you know,
Yes.
feeling safe, I think
Yeah.
is an important, such
Yeah.
an important part about
Yeah.
racing. So,
Yes.
yeah. So then, I mean, then there's other stuff. I think that's a little softer, like the idea of you're doing a lot of training, you're putting in a lot of time. Sometimes it's fun to go to a race with a friend of yours so you can train with them, or go to a race where you know your team is is participating in. So what are some of the other like kind of soft factors maybe that might go into your
Yeah.
decision on where to race?
I mean, it's definitely more fun if you have a group of local athletes all doing a race. It seems to look back like, oh, remember that one time when we were running that long run and it was started storm, like you create stories along the way that are fun to go back on. And you could travel to the race together, get like a big Airbnb together and celebrate afterwards together. It's a lot of fun going with the group of local friends or training buddies. But then, a lot of the coaching companies or tri teams have remote teams, which is also those are also fun because whether you might not know all the faces or the names, you can see your kit. Like we have a lot of athletes all over the country, so we don't all necessarily personally know each other, but we see each other on Facebook or we, chat on different platforms. And then you kind of get to know each other at the races or you see people on the course with your kid on and like they're one of you. So those are two different ways of racing with other people. But then, there's the solo race. It's like a race you really want to do and you can't find anybody else to do it with. You have to be okay with logging all those miles by yourself, traveling with just, by yourself or with a family member or your family, or maybe one friend's coming to support you. Are you okay with that? So those are, I would think, community or support. And going with support too is it's choosing your race. It goes along with asking your family, is this race, is this traveling, is this expense, is this, time of the year when I'm going to be doing a lot of my training, does this all work with our family?
Right, right,
Too.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, last year I was trying to decide between two races and I was like, one was a QT2 race and one
Mhm.
wasn't. I actually preferred the course of the other one, but I picked the QT2 race because I thought it would be more fun and it was. I mean, for sure. It was nice to be around and have the excitement and know that you're not in this by yourself,
Right,
so
right. Exactly why I'm heading down to Puerto Rico
yeah,
in 7
there you
weeks.
go.
Yep,
But
yep.
and also like me, sometimes it's a fun way to convince a friend of yours if they want to try something new, let's like, all right, let's pick
Yeah,
this together and let's train for this together and go through and
right.
have that experience. And
Puerto Rico was never, in 20 years of racing, I've never once entertained the thought of racing in Puerto Rico. And then one of our athletes mentioned, hey, what do you think? And then everybody just kind of started signing up. I'm like, now I'm really excited. I'm like, I'm really excited now to race in Puerto Rico. I've never been there. And yeah, so kind of
yeah,
things just evolve sometimes like that too. Peer
yeah.
pressure in racing.
Yeah, well, why not? But at the end of the day, like that, pick the right race for you, right?
Yes,
That's a
yeah,
factor. Having fun at the race. If you're going to put in all the time and you're going to train, I guess it again comes down to what excites you and what about the race
yes,
is like, you know,
yes,
having other people there is something. I don't know, when you think what excites me, oh my God, that flying descent at Lake Placid, that is so much fun,
yeah,
or oh, I don't really want to do that in another race,
right.
but these are all things that I said, the information is out there. You can find out a ton about your races now that weren't available before. From what
So
people
true.
say, a lot of time, like we do course previews on a lot of races. There's a lot of information out there, not only on the race website, but on YouTube, on
Yeah.
blogs that people write. So I think that probably the bottom line is take advantage of the information. Think about these things, like make a list. Hopefully, as you watch this, you've made a list of the things that Jackie's gone through and go through that list and get your information and make a good choice on your race. Because if you set it up right, then you will have a better chance, I think, at the end of the day when the race comes that you're like, yeah, this is good. I'm excited for this and I'm gonna, race well here.
Yeah. And we do this for fun. We're not pros, we're not making money, so it has to be fun. You know, challenging, fun, all the things. So pick the race that excites you.
Yeah. All right, Jackie, thank you so much.
Thanks, Reem.
So over the course of the next 9 weeks from now, we're going to look at a lot of other topics that go into performing well on race day. So we hope you come back and join us for our future episodes.